Hello everybody, welcome to the seminar on e-waste policy and regulation. My name is Drew Corbin and I'm the Programme Manager for Consumer Protection and Technology at Gogla. This is the next instalment of the Gogla e-waste Toolkit, which is kindly funded and supported by SWED funds. And the aim of the e-waste Toolkit is to identify and share good practice on key areas of e-waste management in off-grid solar sector. And clearly e-waste regulation, it's still early days for e-waste regulation in the sector. We've seen it coming through in one or two key markets, but I'd say it's still too early to talk about what is what is good practice in terms of responding to it. So the aim of today is really to raise awareness about the different types of regulation and what are the implications for companies, and how can the private sector fulfill its obligations. This working group, the e-waste working group, has been looking at the upcoming e-waste regulation in Kenya. There is a draft bill coming through there, and members of Gogla and Korea have been studying that, and we've been discussing it. We largely welcome and support it, and have been talking about the sorts of conditions that we would like to see. And with that exercise, I feel we've dived quite quickly into the details. What are the specific articles and the implications for companies on those. The aim of today is to take a bit of a step back, look at e-waste regulation from a higher perspective, and think about what are the different types of regulation, what are the implications for companies, the responsibilities of different actors, be it the regulator, the consumer, the recycler, the producer, and how can we try and develop a cost-effective scheme that meets everybody's needs. So that's where we're headed today. As always, we have an all-star expert lineup with a presentation to start with. Here we have the agenda. We're going to have Federico Magalini give us an introduction to regulation, and particularly extended producer responsibility schemes, before Athena Kyriakopoulou moderates a panel discussion with the East Africa Communications Organization's Juma Ulu, and we will have Sanchita Mahajan from Karasambhav in India, which is a producers responsibility organization. So, I think a really interesting discussion between a policymaker in East Africa and an industry association that has already had a couple of years in practice in responding to that regulation. Before we dive into the agenda, a couple of points on housekeeping. We will share the slides with the working group and on the Gogla website, the e-waste Toolkit hub. If you haven't already, check it out, www.gogla.org/ewaste. There you can see the first 3 modules of the e-waste Toolkit and some good resources. This seminar is being recorded and will be shared online afterwards. All of the attendees are muted. If you would like to say something, comment, question, please raise a hand, and we'll find you out and give you a chance to chip in. You can also ask a question in the chat box. There is a couple of points where we will have audience Q&A. I think after Federico's presentation, then after the panel discussion as well. But if any questions come to mind in the meantime, please do write them down. Cool. I think that's it for my welcome and introduction. So if I can move on to the next slide. Okay. Yeah. So with no further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Federico Magalini from Sophie's. I'm sure many people are familiar with him. He's the godfather of EWaste. Federico, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Drew. And sorry if you hear a little bit of background noise. I'm currently in a train station in China trying to reach Beijing. So I hope it will be good enough, the connection and the sound quality. Drew, I will ask you to move on with the slides, and please, there might be some animation on the slides, so just click to make sure all the text in the slide is appearing. Okay, so I think this is just a quick overview that many of you have seen already. We are not aiming to go into the details of this slide today during the webinar, but gives an idea how different is the current landscape in East Africa, but also looking at Ghana and India when it comes to the status of e-waste legislation, whether it's in draft, whether it's published, whether it's somewhere down the line, whether the availability of recycling infrastructure is good, fair, or poor, depending on how many plants, how many players are active, and how much the off-grid solar industry is affected by this legal obligation, whether the products are clearly mentioned in the scope, like the batteries, whether they are not, whether it's unclear, whether the batteries are included in other pieces of legislation, like for instance in India. And I think this gives you an idea how variety is the word. I think, Drew, we can jump on the next slides. The interesting element is that when we look about e-waste legislation, you have one single word, electronic product, but then behind you have a lot of different products. We count between 600 and 700 product types. And when it comes to the end of life, they are grouped together and collected in waste streams. And this clustering is mainly technology driven. We cluster products depending on how we need to properly recycle them. And of course, moving to the next slide, slide number 4, these different waste streams represent different products with different priorities. They have different weight, different size, different environmental perspective. Juliana, if you can go to the next slides, flow and priority setting, please. Yes, and some of the waste streams have a high environmental risk or potential because of the presence of ozone-depleting substances like oil fridges, the presence of mercury like old energy savings bulbs, and some of them are relevant from a resource management perspective because they use a lot of critical elements, rare earths, and so on. And of course, all the different waste streams are having different material value. The intrinsic economic value is different from stream to streams. And this, of course, it's helping or is generating, is causing a different landscape. We can move to the next slide, please, Juliana, slide number 5. Which is why do we need e-waste policy? Why around the world policymakers decided that it was time to develop a policy? First of all, because in all markets, not only in developed countries, but also in growing and developing economies, the market penetration is increasing. We buy more and more of these kind of devices, and those devices are not lasting forever. So sooner or later they are becoming waste. Even in countries where reuse is pretty much developed, I'm thinking to Africa, I'm thinking to India, to China. Sooner or later there is nothing else we can do, and we need to recycle those products. And there are, of course, 3 main pillars in the waste management. Juliana, if you can click till the end of the animations, would be great. Thank you. We use a lot of critical and scarce elements because they are enabler for specific functionalities of the products, like indium for the touch screen. there are environmental concerns if we don't manage properly those kind of waste at the end of life. And last but not least, there is more and more people that are looking at the e-waste treatment as a source of let's say, money to survive. And of course, if you click another time, Juliana, the point is that without legal obligation or without specific instruments, we cannot achieve the desired outcome leaving the market alone. So we need the policy because we want to make sure that products are properly managed. When we connect the economic dimension and the environmental dimension, we have this matrix, and this matrix display different areas. And you see in some areas we have like top left corner, the red blocks. We have activities that are generating environmental damages and a profit, and this is usually where criminals are. We have areas like the bottom right corner, the light green one, where people are, let's say, achieving environmental benefits but are losing money. And this is really where you have the financial incentive of EPR scheme. And then, of course, you have the top right corner where you have activities that are generating money, and so having a positive effects, and also generating benefits for the environment, the so-called market-driven solution. And here again, the role of legislator is to prevent crimes to happen, is to make sure companies are operating in a wealthy environment and reward those that are already, let's say, in the top right corner. Now, moving to the next slides, slide number 7. When it comes to extended producer responsibility, we have two main dimensions. We have the financial dimension, so who is paying for the operations, collection and treatment, and who is in charge for the collection and treatment, who is physically organizing, taking care of collection and treatment. And those decisions are, in first place, a political decision. Policymakers are deciding where the financial responsibility is, where the organizational responsibility is. And then, of course, within this legal framework, there are also some strategic decisions that operators or compliance schemes might decide to take, whether they do operation themselves, whether they outsource, where they own the collection infrastructure, collection point, or cages, pallet, boxes, containers, and so on. And this is a very important element to distinguish the financial responsibility and the organizational responsibility. But then if you move to the next slide, slide number 8, the point is that when it comes to the end of life of electronic products, we have always different options. The first one is that taxpayers are paying, and this is, I would say, a residual element, a residual scenario, but there is no specific legislation in place on electronic waste. It's basically local taxes that are contributing to its management. Then we have the case where consumer is paying or waste holder. So if you are in California, you buy a PC, you pay $6, and this $6 is ending up in a fund managed by the Californian government and is using this fund to reimburse recyclers. So every time I bought a PC in California, I pay my fee, even if then I was going back to Italy and my PC has never been recycled in California. Or a waste holder, it's happening in Japan. You want to get rid of your products, you go to the municipal collection point, you have to pay. Or if you are a company and you generate your waste, industrial waste, in most of the cases around the world, you have to pay for your the disposal of your waste. The main trend for electronic waste is any way to develop policy based on extended producer responsibility, means that the producers, not only the manufacturers, but also the importers, the assembler, anyone introducing the product into the national market is having financial responsibility. So these are the main three options, and the last one is probably 99% of the scenario of the situation around the world. What is important, what I always like to highlight is that no matter who is paying, no matter who is the pocket the money is coming out from, it's really important that the system is cost effective, so that we put on the table as little money as needed and not more. And this is why. Because no matter who is paying, if they pay less, they will be happy. If it's taxpayer, they will have less taxes, and they will be more happy. And if you are a policymaker, you will be re-elected again in the next term. If you are a consumer or waste holder and you pay less, of course you have less cost, and you have a consumer happy. They can use the money to purchase other goods to make the economy growth. And of course, if there are a producer paying, it's not that the producer, the private sector are printing money. At the end, the EPR fee will lead anyway to a price increase, and we have seen this happening in Europe, or they might decrease their margins. But sometimes their margins are very little, and they have no room to absorb in their profit margin the cost for proper waste management. And of course, it's a risk of a company that might go, I don't want to say bankrupt, but they might face difficulties. At the end, they might face difficulties. They have to reduce, fire employees and so on. So all in all, just want to say, we need to be cost effective when we set up a system and the legislation. Now, if we move to the next slides, please, Juliana. What does it mean, extended producer responsibility in practice? Well, it means that you have operation, as I said earlier, which is the bottom part of the diagram, and you have technical costs for the collection of the waste, for the recycling infrastructure, collection infrastructure, for the transport, and for the recycling, for the treatment. And then, of course, we have a series of activities, supporting activities like enforcement, awareness raising, the audit, and all those activities, all those costs are need to be financed. And the fund, the EPR fund, are used to cover these kind of costs, because in every stage, in every block of this diagram, we have at the end people that are doing activities, and at the end of the month they want to get their salaries paid. Now, if you go to the last slide, at least from my end, there are different models, different financing model, and we have what we have in Europe with the WE directive, where the financial responsibility is on producers, and the organizational responsibility is also on producer that set up a specific organization called compliance schemes, or PRO, producer responsibility organization, like Caro Samba, for instance. We later will explain a little bit more in detail. So producer has legal obligation, financial responsibility, and organizational responsibilities. We have the case of California, I mentioned already earlier. Consumers are paying when they buy a new equipment, and this is of course no producer responsibility, it's consumer paying. We have Japan, where consumer pay when they dispose, so it's slightly different with California, because on California you pay in advance, in Japan you pay only when dispose. And then you have the case of Japan. Sorry, I think there is another case which is not is covered by some animation. We have the case, let me say, of China or Ghana, to mention a few known cases. It will be most probably the case of Mauritius. It will be most probably the case of Cote d'Ivoire, where there is EPR, but producers are only allocated financial responsibility. They need to pay a fee. The fee is collected by a central body, and this central body is managing the money and then disbursing the money, paying the recycler. So financial responsibility, yes. Organizational responsibility, no. Now, depending on the model, there are three important elements that I think it's really important to highlight. The first is that no matter the model you have in place, it's really important that when you collect the money for e-waste management, use this money for e-waste management, and you keep the money in the system for the purpose the money has been generated. It's really bad if you collect money through a fee, through a levy, and then this money for the purpose of dealing with e-waste, and then you transfer this money to deal with other municipal solid waste or other waste streams. It's a cross financing between industry sectors. The second element is that when you start the system, probably it will need a couple of years to have the system being like kind of in a running stage. and you are spending the first couple of years, it's so-called the learning curve, and you will change a lot. You will add a lot of dynamics into these couple of years, because you will learn, and you will learn from operations, not from theory, not from the debate, from real data. And this is why I always encourage countries and people and industry, just start, just try and learn from what you are doing, because optimization of the system will never stop. Even after 10, 15 years of running a system, you will see that you will have room to change things, make things better. And this is, let's say, what I wanted to say. In the slides you will receive after the webinar, there are a few more slides after this one, but it's just a bigger diagram showing a little bit the financial flow and the material flow in the 4 countries that I mentioned earlier. I think now there's no need to go into that nitty-gritty. I would rather maybe open the floor for discussion, and then you will learn a little bit more details from Caro. I think it would be more interesting to learn from operation from a very practical example in India.
Cool. Thank you very much, Federico, for that whistle-stop tour of the theory and typology of regulations. It's good to have that sound basis to begin our discussions. I have a question. In many off-grid solar markets, across Africa and Asia, they're still very nascent. There's still a low number of sales, struggling private sector, no recycling infrastructure. Does it make sense to be thinking about government regulation there? It seems to my mind that kind of voluntary, individual responsibility or other schemes are kind of more appropriate at that stage. Is it the case that there are kind of necessary conditions before you move to regulation?
I think yes. I think I mean, when it comes to off-grid solar sector, I think the sector itself has been already quite proactive and is running take-back operation on a voluntary basis, something that other sectors haven't done. Of course, one prerequisite is the availability of recycling infrastructure, because it's difficult to recycle products, even if with the best willingness, if you don't have recyclers in place. And maybe if you have to struggle to recover the products and maybe to export the products. So I would say one of the prerequisites is definitely have this technology infrastructure in place. When it comes to the policy, I would say probably having the main let's say prerequisite in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. That's useful. I see we have a hand up from the audience, Esther Kahinga. You need to unmute yourself, then you can speak up. Yeah, go ahead, Esther.
Hi, everyone. How are you? My name is Esther from the Africa Clean Energy Program. I would like to thank Federico for the insights that he's given us in such a simplified way in terms of what is expected or what is happening across policy in different regions of the world. Mine is more of a comment and not of a question. Federico has been doing some work on behalf of this, and we are coming up with a policy handbook on EWaste across Africa. And I'm glad that he has already touched on some of the issues that are likely to emerge as we move along. And this policy has also also brought together all the different issues, and they are captured in that handbook. And I would like to encourage all of us to get hold of the handbook. I'm sure that most of the people here are in the private sector, and the handbook is more policy oriented, but it also gives us an idea of what we can advocate for as private sector. It also gives you an idea of maybe some gaps that may exist in the different policies that may be coming up in different countries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Esther, for that contribution. So if I understand correctly, the handbook will be made publicly available. And if you share it with us, then we can make sure it's shared with a wider working group and features in the EWaste Toolkit. I wonder if, Esther, if you can say a couple of words how you're planning to use that handbook, and what any engagements that you've had with policymakers around on the e-waste issue. It seems Esther's not responding. Does anybody else have a question for Federico? In that case, no. Esther, I'll give you another chance to answer that question, if you care. You're still self-muted.
I mean, Drew, I mean, I can step in a little bit because, yeah, we have this handbook that has been developed, and I think one of the idea is to disseminate the handbook and make it available to main stakeholders in these countries. Just to close now my answer. Sorry, before I was kind of struggling to enter the station with the passport control and so on. I think legislation is important. It's not for me necessarily the first element that we need to have in place, but it's an important element to make sure that all the players are, let's say, at the same level. Legislation is sometimes protecting good companies against unfair competition of others. I'm talking about recyclers. I'm talking about the producers that are eventually charged. And we need to make sure that any legislation in place is developed, taking into account the specific needs of the industry, the specific local condition, and making sure the legislation is working, giving the flexibility that is needed to adapt the system as we learn.
Thanks, Federico. That sounds good, and it's interesting to hear that the ACE program is taking this forward as one of their activities. And I know they have 14 countries where they're looking to do work, and something like 6 priority companies. So yeah, we look forward to hearing how that develops, and indeed would welcome further kind of engagement, as you say, to make sure that the regulation is appropriate for every context and is working with industry to make sure it's cost effective and appropriate to industry needs as well. Cool. Can I ask if anybody else has another question for Federico? If not, I think I suggest we move on. Oh, there's a question popped up now. I know, it's Esther saying she has a bad connection. Cool. In that case, let's move on. I will pass over to Athena, but firstly, thanks very much to Federico. Thanks for that excellent introduction, especially whilst on the move in a train station in China. We very much appreciate it, and yeah, looking forward to being in touch more on this agenda. Over to you, Athena.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. Thank you, Drew, and thanks to Federico for that great introduction. So I don't know if you can all see me. Hello, everyone. I'd like to invite our 2 panelists today. We have a great lineup. We have Juma Oru from IACO. Juma, yes, he is, and Sanchita from Karo Sambhav in India. If I can invite them to join me with their cameras and microphones. Let's see. We're going to welcome. Hi. Great. So, Sanchita, welcome. We're going to discuss today the journey of e-waste regulation, looking at it from the perspective of 2 different market regions that are at different stages in their regulation journey. Yeah. Just waiting for the webcams to turn on. Do we have their titles, Juliana? Great. Juma, do we have you on the line?
Yes, I'm there.
Great. Welcome both. I'm really happy that you could make the time today to join us for this and to tell us a little bit about what you do. I'd like to start with Juma. Juma, could you introduce yourself and Iako just briefly?
Okay, thank you, Athena. My name is Juma Oro. I do work for Communications Authority of Kenya, which is an ICT regulator in Kenya. But then what I do at another level is at the East Africa Communications Organization, where we have got a technical working group on EWaste management and green ICT. So I'm the chairperson of that technical working group at the East African level. And this technical working group basically is concerned with ensuring that we do have harmonized policies and laws and systems to manage EWaste within the East African region. So basically, for introduction, that's what I do. I'm also a member of the National EWaste Management Steering Committee, that is for Kenya as a country. So as you are aware, East Africa, we have 6 countries. So each and every country have got a national steering committee. And there is also the regional steering committee that I've talked about, where I am the chairperson.
Fantastic, thank you. And can you tell us a little bit more about the 5-year strategy? When was it started? When is the end of it?
So at the East African level, we thought about having a harmonized way of handling EWaste. And with that thought came the regional EWaste strategy. So in 2017, we launched a regional EWaste strategy, which is a 5-year strategy going to up to 2023. And this strategy has got a number of pillars in it, but mainly what we are aiming at is we are aiming at having zero negative impact of EWaste within the East African region by 2030. How are we going to achieve this? This is mainly about sustainable management of EWaste within the East African region. So in the 5-year strategy, and the pillars that I've talked about, it has about 5 pillars. And the main pillar, or the first one, is on policy, law, and legal framework, because this is one area that is important for us in terms of having concerted efforts in management of EWaste. You realize, or we noted that within the East African countries, various players are doing various things differently, and there are no concerted efforts. So what we are saying is, in terms of bringing people to be on the same page, we need to have laws and policies that are kind of harmonized. So the policy is seeking to address that by ensuring that we have got some kind of harmonization and guidelines in terms of our laws and the policies and the legal framework, including also whatever guidelines and standards that may be necessary for EWaste management. So that forms the main pillar and the first pillar of our strategy, and we would want to see by the end of the 5 years, we have an harmonized system in terms of the regulatory framework. Now, the second pillar is on what we call the EWaste infrastructure. Because again, if you are going to manage EWaste, then we need to have an infrastructure for it. And this infrastructure includes right from EWaste collection, transportation, recycling, and the other recovery systems of EWaste. So this infrastructure, okay, we are together?
Yes.
Yeah, the infrastructure bit of it is one area we are also looking forward to have adequate infrastructure for handling of EWaste within the region. That is the second pillar of our strategy. And then we have the third pillar of the strategy, where we are talking about resource mobilization, because at the end of the day, if you are to have infrastructure, you are to do harmonized laws, you would need some resources. Now, that is one pillar where we are looking forward to raising resources from those who are able to support e-waste management. Again, as Federico had mentioned earlier, the issues of extended producer responsibility, so that this can also be other ways of raising resources for management of e-waste, and also advanced recycling fees, those kind of things. So we are looking forward to, at the end of it, having more of an e-waste fund within the region that can be used to manage the issues to do with e-waste. Then we have the other pillar where we are talking about the institutional framework of management of e-waste. How then do we want to approach it in terms of institutions? Do we have institutions that are able to manage e-waste within the East African region? And under this, we have got two levels that we have identified that we want to work with. And one level is where I talked about. We have established national e-waste management steering committees. Now, these national e-waste steering committees brings together e-waste stakeholders within a country. So for us, we have 5 countries, 6 countries in the East African region, and every country have got their own committee at the national level. So it brings together all the stakeholders of e-waste, so they are able to talk with one voice, and they're able to do things in a uniform manner. Now, these national steering committees, their chairpersons and their secretaries are the ones that now sit at the regional steering committee, because then now at that level, we want to harmonize at the regional level. Whatever happens at the national level, then there is a way that this filters and gets into the regional level, so that we are able still to have harmonized systems in the region. Now, that forms part of the institutional framework for management of e-waste within the region, both the national steering committees and the regional steering committee. Then the other pillar deals with capacity building, deals with research, and deals with also the issue of monitoring and evaluation. Because then what are we saying in capacity building? We need to have, for example, we need to create awareness on e-waste, because one of the issues in management of e-waste is people have to be aware what is e-waste and how does it impact on us, and then how do we know where to take our e-waste. So at the very lowest level, the consumer need to know that there is a way they can be able to move their e-waste to a certain point. And this awareness starts with knowing that you have to segregate your waste within the host household and also within our institution. Because when you segregate the waste, then you have your e-waste segregated from the other waste, and it becomes easier for collection and then transportation to the people who can be able to manage e-waste. So, and then capacity building, we are looking forward to streamlining or trying to bring e-waste in our educational institutions, so that people start learning about e-waste at that level, and they become aware from that level. So, like our universities, I know some of them have set up e-waste curriculum. So that is what is aiming at in terms of capacity building, and also generally building capacity among the e-waste stakeholders within the region, and we are doing that also through workshops. And then we also have got a number of issues in terms of monitoring and evaluation. When we are talking about all these things I've talked about, how do we then monitor and how do we evaluate that we are actually on the track? So the strategy has got a component on how we are doing our monitoring and evaluation of all these activities, because we have an action plan for the next 5 years. Now, this action plan, we have to monitor it, we have to evaluate where we are not doing well. We need to come up with strategies on how we can improve on that. So basically, that sums up the 5-year strategy. And on top of that, we have got a communication communication aspect of the strategy, where we are
It
disseminating this strategy to the
absolutely.
relevant countries.
It's an
I hope I've not taken a lot of time. Yeah.
No, it sounds like an incredibly comprehensive strategy, and something that the region very much needs. It's got the team behind it is fantastic, and it's very well thought through. And you're at the beginning of implementing this strategy. You said it was put into place in 2017, so it's still in the beginning phases of getting to that 2023 vision of zero net impact of electronic waste. So really lofty goal, but with a great action plan. Before we hear from Sanchita about how this journey has been experienced in India, Juma, can you tell us what products, what the product groupings are within this strategy?
Okay, can you just come again? You mean product groupings in terms of?
In terms of, are you focusing only on ICT? Federico earlier showed us some different categories. You have cooling and refrigeration. You have small components. How is the EWaste strategy and the EWaste group hoping to categorize e-waste?
Okay, thank you again for that. What we are doing, because we are talking of e-waste, so we are talking of both electronics and electrical. So we are not discriminating in terms of only ICT. So we are talking of electricals and electronics. So all that is covered within our strategy. And of course, I also like the idea of the Offgrid Solar, which is something that I didn't quite have much knowledge about, but it's coming out that this is one area where we are also having a lot of e-waste that can be managed. So, and I believe that is still covered under the electricals and the electronics. So we are covering all in terms of e-waste, no matter what type of e-waste.
Yes, absolutely. I think research shows that off-grid is about 3 or 4% of total e-waste. So it's a small amount, but it's there, and it does fall under electronics. Thank you, Juma. I just want to touch base with Sanchita now. Arguably, India is a little bit further along in your journey. But before we get into that, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and about Karo Sambhav?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And my name is Sanchita. I have been working with Karo Sambhav since 2017. I have worked in various verticals, including communications, marketing, but now my work focuses on account management for producers. Essentially, I help producers maintain their EPR compliances. Karo Sambhav started in 2017 September, and it was essentially a need of the industry for a professional solution, because the current stakeholders somehow did not match up to the standards that global companies would want to adhere to. I mean, I'd like to get into the regulation, because that's how that's what sort of helped shape Karo's vision. But so the regulation basically talks about 3 core areas, which is on awareness, because although there is a lot of market penetration, there is not much awareness on e-waste. So it's good that the 5-year strategy that Juma talked about is already countering that. The second aspect is on getting producers to invest in a lot of collection infrastructure, because we don't have that in the country. And the third is, of course, making sure that whatever targets are set based on, there are incremental targets, those need to be fulfilled. The way, again, the regulation, and I'll cover some basics before I can move on to the big picture stuff. The regulation currently covers 21 categories of e-waste, 16 IT categories and 5 consumer electronics. It does not cover off-grid, but there are talks of including it in the 2016 rules which had come out. There's a lot of at least public pressure which is building up, because also which ties into the big ambitious targets that India has on its renewable energy generation. So all of that is sort of feeding into getting solar as a part of the e-waste rules which are there right now. Now, Karo Sambhav started as an industry consortium of 4 big companies, which is Apple, HP, Dell, and Lenovo. The idea was, or in the first year, essentially the vision was to create an ecosystem which can enable producers to fulfill their EPR, but also to do it in a manner which accounts for, the Indian scenario, which means that we account for the 95% of the e-waste which currently sits in the informal sector. We are dealing with very
95.
low. Yes.
Sorry, 95%.
Yes. I mean, even going before that, there is not much reliable data on what is the e-waste generation in the country. There are various numbers. I believe there was a UN report on this as well, but the true numbers we are still not sure of. But the latest, I believe, is 95% sits with the informal sector. And very low consumer awareness on e-waste as a waste stream rather than a commodity. So the focus of Karo Sambhav's operations and programs was to, in the first step, to get different stakeholders onto the same platform, which essentially means countering all of the points that I think Federico also mentioned earlier. You have awareness, you have regulation, you have standardization, audits, and of course, fulfilling the operational compliances as well of collection targets. So all of that was, it kind of helped shape the different verticals and the programs that Karo Sambhav is currently involved in. This includes, again, very, I would say, deep engagement with consumers in via educational institutions. So our programs run in more than, I believe, so far 2,000 schools, and we have touched more than 500, offices. And we've also worked with multiple state regulators on enabling them to implement EPR in their states. So there's a lot of focus on, a lot of grassroots work, reaching out to as many stakeholders which can make an impact, and again having systems thinking approach to solving the larger e-waste challenge in the country. Not a myopic view of just 1 or 2 set of compliances, but rather tackling the entire ecosystem as a whole.
I'm hearing a lot of similarities with the EWaste strategy that Juma just told us about, focus on improving infrastructure and a focus on awareness. What would you say in the last couple years of operations, what have been your lessons learned? What advice do you have for somebody going through that process?
There are a lot of learnings. A lot of them are operational because while there is a good start with the rules and the guidelines, again, like Federico said, the system needs to be constantly optimized. So on an operational level, we are kind of learning about the different market dynamics on procurement of waste, on what stakeholders to kind of reach out to, who can enable the maximum impact. But as a larger, I think from a more top level or a big picture perspective, it is very important that organizations identify what, how is it that they can go beyond what just the regulation asks for, because that kind of sets the bar really low. So for us at Karo Sambhav, we've always had, this thing to surpass the standards, because we know that these standards are not optimal as of now. For example, we don't, in the country, while the collection and the procurement and the channelization of waste has happened, we don't have the right recycling infrastructure. Essentially, we are inhibited by capacity of responsible recycling. It's also about, we would also encourage new companies to kind of, ensure that they're working with the right stakeholders. So for example, our partnership with the International Finance Corporation kind of helped us get that platform and create that platform wherein we could talk about what are the kind of investments that are needed in the sector. We could talk about what are the operational challenges. We could talk about and focus a lot on expanding the reach of the organization. So getting the right partnerships would be, and quite early on, would really help you to kind of elevate the work that you're doing. And lastly, I think we've also had a lot of we've had to step back on a lot of things. So the system as a whole needs to grow. It is not just what the regulation demands or one set of stakeholders, is kind of running towards. The entire ecosystem and the different set of stakeholders need to move together, when it comes to implementing and absorbing the regulation.
Everyone plays a part in that. Absolutely. So there is, thank you for those lessons learned. I think that they're really key. And I think what you talked about how critical your partnership was with, for instance, the IFC, resources to enable you to actually implement some of those things that needed to be implemented. I think that's a challenge, Juma, that you mentioned, is finding the resources right now to implement the strategy. Another challenge that I think, Juma, that you are dealing with is harmonizing across 6 different countries. So at the moment, different countries are at different stages of their policy journey. Do you see how different do you think policy will be across those 6 countries? Is it looking to be the same? Something, for example, about financing and funding. Do you think countries will have the same protocols, or will that differ greatly?
Okay, thank you, Athena. I think that's one of the areas we are really keen on, because you would find that, for example, if I have to give an example, and actually that is what is happening, you would find that in Kenya, we do have the guidelines, EWaste guidelines, but we still don't have a regulation. And in Uganda, they have got the EWaste policy, but they don't have regulation, neither do they have guidelines. Then in Rwanda, they have regulations and policy, and no guidelines. In Tanzania, they do have policy, and they still do not have the others. In Burundi, they don't have any of those, and South Sudan. So basically, as you said, we are at different stages in terms of the legal framework in all the 6 countries. And that is why we say the first action point in our EWaste strategy is to identify the differences in policy, law, and legal framework, the gaps that exist, and then try to work towards every country having to bridge these gaps, so that we are able to have policy, we are able to have law, we are able to have guidelines, and we are able to have standards. All this across the 6 countries. Now, that is one of the things that I must thank Federico for, because he has already assisted us in getting some funding from GIZ and some technical support, which enabled us to identify those differences in the legal framework, and with some guidelines now on how this can be narrowed, so that we can be able to have the uniformity in the legal framework. So it's one of the areas we are keen on dealing with.
So the strategy does include work on harmonizing and, as you said, reaching uniformity amongst the different countries that form part of EACO.
Yes, okay. That's part of the strategy, and it's one thing we would want to achieve. I think by next year.
Fantastic. And you said that not all of the countries have the same level of policy, and some don't have any at all. What do you think are the key steps that are needed to be done as an ecosystem prior to that regulation coming into force?
Okay, so based on what we did, the project that I talked about, which was supported by GIZ, what we are doing is we are going to communicate to every country the results of that project and the recommendations that were made. So we are going to communicate to all the countries, and in this case, I mean, we'll be communicating to the ICT regulators in all the 6 countries. We are going to communicate to the ministries of environment and ministries of ICT, because in the 6 countries, you would find in some countries, it is the Ministry of Environment that is in charge of EWaste. In other countries, you will find it is the Ministry of ICT that is in charge of EWaste. So we are going to communicate these recommendations to the ministries that are concerned in each and every country, so that they can be able now to work on their regulatory framework and come up with the laws. Because again, there are some guidelines we have provided. Like you are aware that Kenya, we have got a regulation that is just about to be enacted, and then so we have come up with more of a guideline on how each and every country can come up with their regulations, so that we can achieve some basic uniformity. It may not be exactly the same, but then we have some basic principles and areas of commonality, so that as they come up with their laws and regulations and policies, they are able to address those basic and common issues across the region. So that communication will be going to these countries, I believe, before September, so that they are all able to work on their policies and their regulations at the same time, so that by end of next year, we can say that we are all at the same level in terms of the regulatory framework.
And as Sanchita said, it takes the whole ecosystem to improve. It's not just regulation. There's a lot of different players there to reach success of that vision. So as one of the EACO representatives, what advice would you have to the off-grid solar sector or GOGLA members about how they can engage and interact with this process?
Yes, it doesn't only take the regulatory framework. That is why, as I started talking about the strategy, I gave the 6 pillars. Regulatory framework is just one of them. And what I can advise even for the off-grid solar, because what is key here is if we can have the regulation, because that will guide everybody on how to go. But the key thing here is awareness, because people have to be aware that whatever they may be using, whether from the off-grid solar or any other type of energy they are using, whatever they're using eventually will turn to EWaste. So they need to know what do they have to do with this kind of products when they are not interested in using them anymore. They need to collect them. They need to hand them over to the people who can be able to manage them in an environmentally sound way. So I would say that awareness is most important at the consumer level, at the level of public and private institutions, because again, there's a lot of EWaste that are lying in the public institutions and they are not being given out to the people who can actually handle them. So I would say awareness cuts across all these strategies that we are having for management of EWaste.
Sanchita, I see you nodding there. I think that you're in agreement with the key part that awareness plays. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience? What projects have you done? What are the successes? What are the challenges?
Right. So I think one of the biggest challenges is with consumer engagement. It is with changing consumer behavior, because you can set up whatever number of collection points that we want. We can set up, create whatever channels possible. But if the consumer expectation continues to be that, e-waste is not waste, like your old phones are not e-waste anymore, and they're being sold off at refurbishment prices, it will not make the system cost effective ever. And we have to change that through continued engagement, which is why there need to be multiple touch points with consumers. From your strategy for awareness will need to have a multi-channel approach. It will need to have different points of contact with the consumers, and it will essentially, there needs to be a lot more focus on driving consumer behavior, which is starting to happen, but is not necessarily at the level that we would like yet. Which is why you see waste coming from consumers is far less, and that 95% number that we spoke about, it sits with the informal sector. This is the exact reason, because there isn't awareness.
I think it's a common problem with e-waste globally, this wanting to hold on to it and not give it to, as Juma said, people who can handle it responsibly. Yeah, so I think awareness is one of the key things Karo Sambhav does, but the other big part of it is acting as a PRO, as a compliance scheme, which Federico mentioned earlier. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means, how it was set up, and how it might benefit e-waste producers to be a part of that?
Right, so I think when as a PRO right now, the regulation, although it has recognized PROs, it is asking for recognition of PROs. However, it is not really identifying where does the liability sit, which is where it's quite different from, I think, the European systems, where it is quite clear that as soon as you're a part of a PRO, the liability kind of shifts. And there is a collective scheme which kind of producers can cater to. But there is a lot of ambiguity, I think, even now in the regulation, wherein what are the liabilities of a producer versus, a PRO. As much as we would like to be proactive in, taking a lot of engaging a lot with producers and kind of doing a lot more for them on a collective basis, but currently our regulation is focused a lot on producers. That means even from a moral perspective, EPR is seen as their moral responsibility, which is not how it should be. EPR essentially means producers are being seen as the most effective player in the entire ecosystem to kind of solve the challenge. But the way the regulation is seen right now, it is kind of placing all of that on producers only, which kind of makes our position in a lot of cases moot. Coming back to how it has benefited producers, definitely there's a big component of cost, wherein collectively compliances which are required under the rules can be maintained. For example, a lot of the awareness programs that we do are collective. The messaging that goes out is collective, and it's done on on behalf of all of the participating brands. Similarly, setting up of collection infrastructure is a common activity. So producers do see benefit in joining a common organization wherein, they are kind of having a cost impact. But the concept of a PRO is not yet fully functional in the country. Like, that's one point I would definitely like to make, and it's definitely not as elaborate as in other countries, I would say.
Just for our audience members who are listening and who don't know what a PRO is, can you give a really brief definition of that?
Okay. So PRO would be, it's a producer responsibility organization, and it is essentially a collective, it functions almost like an association, an industry association, wherein you are onboarding members and fulfilling compliances on behalf of them. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the activities are common, so they do find cost benefit in joining a PRO and ensuring.
Like setting up collective infrastructure for collection of e-waste, as well as awareness campaigns that can be shared across the different members. Yeah. Coming back. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just trying to just make one point. Collection infrastructure and collection channels would not necessarily just be physical, points here. I mean, that's a distinction that is required, because for us, collection channels are also, the informal sector, waste collectors, last mile collectors. Yeah. So there is a lot of work which is happening on education and engagement with the informal sector, and sort of integrating them into formal channels, which can then feed into a proper collection system for producers.
Speaking of the informal sector, Sanchita, thank you. We have a question for Juma about the informal sector. There are a lot of responsible companies within the IACO region who are concerned that there might be a high level of free riders that sell non-quality verified products, which obviously have a shorter lifetime and generate more waste, but won't be paying for e-waste collection. How does the strategy, how is regulation planning on tackling the issue of free riders in terms of e-waste producers? It seems that we have a connection problem with Juma. Why don't we, until we get him back online, Sanchita, can you tell us how are you tackling the problem? Hello, Juma. Can you hear us?
The problem of?
Yes, hi. We lost your connection and we didn't hear your answer to that question.
Oh,
could you repeat it, please?
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we are.
Yes. So what I'm saying, within our strategy, we are actually going to apply the principle of the EPR, the producer pays.
Yes.
So basically, that would deal with the issue of some people riding on without necessarily paying for this management. So EPR is a key principle within our strategy. And even if you look at the regulations that we are coming up with in the various countries, like the one for Kenya, EPR is one principle that is embedded within that regulation.
For our audience members who don't know how that works, can you tell us a little bit about what aspect of EPR will help tackle free riders?
Yeah, so what we are talking about here is basically, if you're a producer of any electronics or electrical, and you are going to sell it in the market, so you would have to actually pay some fees for that. Yeah, there's some fees that you would have to pay with it, so that fees would go into management of the e-waste finally when it turns out to be an e-waste. So it's a fee that would be paid by every producer, and that is why in our regulations you would find that we have got something that we call the registry. The registry will be managing all this, including collection of these fees, that is both for the extended producer responsibility fees and the advanced recycling fees.
Mm-hmm. Do those fees take into account the quality of a product? So for instance, if you have solar component number 1 that lasts 5 years and solar component number 2 that lasts 25 years, the person selling the second product is producing a lot less waste because that product is of higher quality. Does the EACO EPR strategy take that into consideration?
Sure. Actually, you remember the years or the lifespan of products are much taken care of within that principle. It will have to be taken into account. And then added to that, the other thing that we are going to do is to set standards for EEE, the electronics and electrical, so that in terms of standard, what we are accepting, it should be a standard that it's not something that is going to turn to EWaste in the next year. So we are going to start dealing with it at that level in terms of what standards of electrical and electronics are we talking about that could come through. And then whatever has come through in terms of years, it is going to be taken into account in terms of calculating the EPR fees and the advanced recycling fees.
It's this holistic approach, not just to e-waste, but you're also looking at quality standards of products being sold and making sure that those aren't forced upon import to make sure that good quality products come in the first place. Yes.
In terms of the principle of reducing e-waste, the 4 R's of e-waste management. So reducing e-waste, so by ensuring that the standards of goods for ICTQ, the electronics and electrodes that come in are of high standard, then in that way you are reducing the e-waste before it becomes e-waste itself.
Absolutely. Sanchita, going back to you, can you tell us how has India kind of tackled this problem of lower quality products?
There isn't a standard, and however, there are no quality standards for the product, and in fact there are no standards at all for how the entire e-waste regulation, like different stakeholders, what are the standards that need to be maintained. We are working on something wherein standards can be brought in the value chain, but there are no government standards for it. For the issue of free riders, I'd just like to add that one of the ways in which the Indian regulation tried to tackle it with an amendment in 2018 was to, have targets, collection targets, even for the companies wherein their products have not reached their end of life yet, and how those could be set off in the future when the products do reach their end of life and the liability of the producer starts. But there are no quality standards on what longevity of a product needs to be, to reduce e-waste.
So it is just applied regardless of the quality of the product. Okay. I would just like to open the floor to our audience for questions. If you have a question, please do type it into the chat box or the question box. I will keep an eye there as I continue. I have a few more questions for our panelists, but please, anybody in the audience, if you have a question, please type it into the chat box now. Juma, I'd like to come back to you and to ask you about, you mentioned that infrastructure is one of the 5 pillars of the EACO strategy. So can you tell me about what the current e-waste infrastructure looks like in East Africa?
Okay, thank you. Infrastructure is key in managing e-waste, and presently we don't want to say we have very adequate infrastructure, but again, we can also say we have good infrastructure. For example, in Kenya, we have about 3 recyclers. Of course, some 2 are operating at a small level. One is operating at a bigger level. In Tanzania, we also have some recycler is coming up. It's not
Yes.
yet fully. And then in Burundi, we do have a small one, the one operating in Kenya. It has a branch in Burundi. And then in Uganda, we don't quite have a recycler as we are speaking. And Rwanda is where we have the biggest recycler now. That is the one for EnviroSouth. So basically, what happens is that there are things we can do within East Africa region. South Sudan, we don't have any recycler. So there are things we can do within the region, but again, all these recyclers, there are certain things they are not able to handle. So those have to be exported to Europe to be dealt with. So what we are looking forward to as a region, other than every country having some infrastructure on e-waste recycling, we want to have one facility that can be able to handle all the e-waste components. So that is what we are looking forward to having at the end of a successful strategy. To have one facility, it may be a new facility, or it could be existing facilities that we are going to upgrade to be able to serve that purpose.
Great. So I think we're unfortunately coming to the end of this panel discussion, and we'll start to wrap up. Juma, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yes, so finally, I have to say that e-waste is a matter that is coming up, and it is so important that we deal with it before it becomes more of a problem, like some of us have had with plastics in East Africa region, and it is now that we are starting to ban plastic when it has already reached levels that are almost unsustainable. And so for e-waste, we are looking forward to dealing with it before it gets to those levels which we can say are unsustainable or are unable to deal with. So I would urge everyone that let us all agree to start to deal with this at our household level by segregating our waste so that we can have e-waste on its own. And let us also deal with this at what we call the local government level. I know in other countries they call them municipal level. In other countries they are local council or county. In Kenya now we have them as county government. So we also need to start dealing with the e-waste at those levels, because it is also a waste like the others that are being handled by the municipal councils. So if we can be able to, at the household level, segregate our waste, at the office level, segregate our waste, and at the county levels or municipal levels, we are able to have strategies on how to collect the e-waste from the household and the public and private institutions, and then we are able to hand it over to the recyclers, and I think we'll be able to manage this and control the negative effects of e-waste.
Thank you very much, Juma. Sanchita, do you have final
and may
thoughts?
I say thank you very much for organizing this. A good time. I may have not come earlier on, so I didn't say thank you to the people I'm meeting here. I have not met Corbin, but now I can hear his voice, and Juliana. Of course, Federico, we have been with him in other things, and Sanchita, good to meet you. And Athena, you have met before, and thank you for making me part of this panel, and I would like to participate in similar.
Thank you, Juma. Thank you very much. Sanchita, final thoughts?
I think it's very hard to kind of compress it into just a few words, but yeah, there will be learnings, and like I think for me a key takeaway was that the system will constantly get optimized, but it is important that we have the right stakeholders, we have the right expertise and the right partnerships to enable the larger ecosystem that needs to work together to kind of, solve e-waste as a larger problem. And I keep going back to the ecosystem approach because that for us has what has worked. The fact that, there are so many different stakeholders and they're all contributing to the same platform kind of has enabled the scale up of the system so fast in, such a small amount of time. So for any new entity, I think if they kind of would consider all of these, takeaways, it might just, work for them as well. It did for us. But thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you to both Juma and Sanchita for your time and contribution to this panel. With that, I'm going to wrap up the panel and hand it back to Drew. We do have some audience questions, but we'll send those through via email. So please continue asking your questions. We'll collect them and try and get the answers to you. And on that note, I will hand this over back to Drew. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Athena, and thank you to Juma and Sanchita. I noticed Cynthia's question was whether they can have whether Juma can share the name of the recyclers in Kenya. What I can tell you is that as part of the EWaste Toolkit, we are developing a catalogue of service providers, which is a list of e-waste management companies, recyclers, working in the relevant countries for GOGLA members. So check out that catalogue, Cynthia, which you will find on the GOGLA websites. Again, thank you very much to Athena. This is actually the last seminar that we'll be working together on. The EWaste Toolkit is 6 modules and we've now completed 4. I'd like to give a massive thanks to Athena for bringing all of her experience and energy to the toolkit. Athena, can I quickly ask, do you have any insights from working with GOGLA members and working on the toolkit over the last 8 months or so?
Thanks, Drew. It's been an absolutely fantastic experience, and I have loved working on this toolkit. The community is really vibrant, and I have to say that it's inspiring and positive to see so many people coming together to tackle a challenge in a positive way. One of my favorite questions over this toolkit has been something positive about e-waste, and I think the answer to that is clear across all stakeholders who have participated. It's about job creation, it's about doing good for the environment, it's about making a better ecosystem, and it's also about looking back and being better at what we do, being better at making solar, being better at distributing solar. So in tackling the end-of-life products and the challenges inherent to that, it's only been an improvement. And particularly with the off-grid solar sector, they have taken a lead as an industry in pushing that forward. So I think it's been a positive and optimistic experience overall.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks very much. And yeah, certainly something that I've learned from working with you is, the positive elements of doing well on e-waste. I think it could be easy and wrong to look at it as just expensive and costly, but I think the industry needs to move into the performance zone now. I think it's established, and I think doing well on e-waste can strengthen environmental impact, social impact, create stronger brands, and be good for the growth of the industry as a whole. So yeah, thank you very much for guiding us on this toolkit, and I'm providing some very kind of practical insights and tools for GOGLA members on that. And I'm sure we're going to keep in touch and be seeing more of each other in future. Juliana, can we have the next slide, please? Anyway, the next slide is talking about the next steps for the toolkit. So next week we will have this recorded seminar online, and the slides for this this seminar will be circulated as well. Briefing note module 3 is coming soon. That's looking at the financials of e-waste management. We had a seminar on that, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we're working to kind of wrap that up into the briefing notes. Then the briefing note for this module, the policy and regulations, is going to be coming out soon, and perhaps towards the end of August. If you have any materials or resources that you'd like to share that can feature in that, please do send our way. You can see Juliana's email there. Then we're going to have a bit of a break for August and the first half of September until the Seminar 5 and Seminar 6. Which are going to be coming in the autumn, late September, October time, and they're going to be focused on take-back channels and how companies and recyclers can access waste, and also thinking about e-waste and the consumer, which is looking to explore consumer awareness, insights, understandings, kind of messages that industries and companies and others can give to consumers to ease the e-waste challenge. If you have any stories to tell around that, do get in touch, and we'd be happy to explore featuring your work on a seminar or in a briefing note. We had the e-waste festival a couple of weeks back in Nairobi, which was a fantastic event. There was 55 participants, came from the 3 days from all over East Africa, Europe, US, South Asia. It was really good to have the e-waste working group coming together. We had companies, recyclers, sector support programs, and it was a very nice vibe. And we had half a day session on the policy landscape, particularly focused on Kenya, but I'd say that the general message from that around policy was that the industry welcomes regulation on e-waste that is fair, transparent, and appropriate. Indeed, there is a Gogler industry opinion that supports the principle of extended producer responsibility. But there are concerns that regulation could bring undue costs from, for example, from collection that are passed on to consumers, and it could hurt affordability and slow down market growth rates. Also, that this question I asked earlier, that it could be that responsible companies end up paying over the odds for non-quality verified products from free riders, and it widens that gap between quality and non-quality and hurts consumers. So, we welcome regulation, but we're keen that it is appropriate and supportive for responsible companies. If you want to look at any of the website materials, the festival materials, there's a whole host of presentations, and you can see the award winners from the Global Leap. Go online to the URL there. But with that, I will close the seminar today with another fantastic e-waste joke. As you absorb this and no doubt fall around laughing, I'll take the opportunity to thank everybody that's participated today. Federico, Juma, Sanchita, of course, Athena, again, and to all of the attendees for listening in and asking the questions. So thank you very much, everybody, and watch this space. We'll be in touch again soon for the next installment of the EWaste Toolkit. Goodbye.